Hello, my children. Welcome to our unit number 4, and this is your introduction to political geography. So let's get this party started. I would love for you guys to take notes, just like as if I were in class with you. And of course, when there's a flashcard on the screen, please pause the video so you can get some of the information on the flashcard, and then go ahead and resume when you're ready to hear the discussion. As always, always available via email. You guys are welcome to go ahead and email me anytime. I will be posting a series of videos in 15-minute increments until I get back to school. So here we go. Okay, so political geography is the study of the patterns and methods that humans use to organize claims to portions of the Earth's surface. So, can you think of what type of map this is? Some of you are probably thinking that it's a thematic map. Yes, it is. And the theme here is that it is a theme of political boundaries. Each one of these lines on this map of Africa represent a line or boundary or border from one state to the next. Okay, that's what political geography is. It's how people have organized the patterns on Earth in a method that would be recognized by others outside of their state. So it's finally time for us to go over what a state is. And I'm super sad that I don't get a chance to go over this with you guys in class, but I think today you'll better understand why we call things states and not countries. So let's move on. So what is a state? So a state is a political unit. Just like we were looking at the map of Africa, you have a map here of the US, okay? Now, how did the United States become known as states instead of provinces or territories like everybody else uses? Well, the story on that goes back to the colonies. The 13 colonies were originally 13 different states. They were not unified until they came together to fight the British and declared their independence as one. So that is why they're called the United States, is because they were once each independently sovereign. They believed that each of them operated differently from the other. So they felt natural to call themselves the United States, and therefore, after each new territory was created with Western expansion, instead of calling anything else a province or a territory, they just continued to use the term state when each of these additional 50, well, up to 50, were created. So that is why kind of we did it a little bit wrong. So that is why I continue to use the term state instead of country, but it is a synonymous term. States are independent countries. So what is the independent country here? If you said the United States, you are correct. Remember, they have defined boundaries, meaning it's recognized by another state. Everyone worldwide would recognize this outline here as the Canadian border and this here as the Mexican border. That defines our state. It's internationally recognized, so again, other states outside of our border recognize our sovereignty. There are gray areas, of course. With everything with geography, there's always an anomaly or an exception to the rule. And exceptions here would be considered things like our territories that we do own. For example, Puerto Rico, Guam, military bases. There's a whole bunch that function not as individual states, but kind of as an extension to an existing state. Here you have the definition for sovereignty. And again, as a reminder, go ahead and pause as necessary to get your flashcards ready and um, then resume when you're ready to go over the next term that we're discussing. So sovereignty is basically authority. Okay, sovereignty means that there is something in power, some government style or system that's in power that has been given the authority to make decisions for that state. Okay, and these decisions go from the most menial in what you might think unimportant decisions to very significant. Obviously, big ones include government style, what type of defense systems they might have, and as well as foreign policies on how they're going to interact with other states. And then there are micro units or subunits to sovereignty. So, for example, each one of our 50 US states has its own sovereignty from the next. Utah has its own laws that are not the same as Nevada or other policies that other states follow that we do not. We each have a state constitution that is under the umbrella of our federal sovereignty. All right, so let's talk about how things are gaining statehood. I'm sure a handful of you guys are aware of the story with how the United States gained its sovereignty and its statehood, but you haven't had all of your U.S. history yet, and that was taught last year, and it might be a little bit fuzzy, so let's just go over the basics. So you need to have a defined territory. Okay, and you also have to have a permanent population. This is very important to have a permanent population. You must have an existing functional government. Now, this government doesn't have to be recognized necessarily, but it does need to be functioning. You then, of course, have to declare and effectively gain your independence, just like the United States effectively declared and then gained their independence. Often this is fought in with a war, but not always. Okay, not always. Look at many of these states here were not created under duress. They were just territories that eventually became permanent population centers with functioning governments, and then they were awarded their statehood. Eventually, these states will want to join supranational organizations, and an exception or an exceptional one would be to join the United Nations General Assembly. This is just kind of a fun map here of Australia. If Australia had ever gotten all of its statehood requests permitted, there are a total of 24 different times that Australia had attempted to gain its independence, and these are all of the different attempts at its own statehood. Of course, we know it as Australia today, but these were its numerous attempts to gain its own independence from the Great Britain Crown. So it's just kind of fun to look at that one on what Australia could actually look like today. And it's pretty significant to have 24 states, considering the United States, we've got 50. So that could definitely be, there's only about 200 countries or states in the world now. And that alone right there would have been an additional 25. Okay, so then you've probably heard the term nation. So what is a nation? Why don't you think of what a nation is before you go on to the next slide? Go ahead and pause it here for a second and think to yourself what could possibly be a nation, and maybe write down a couple of questions that you have about what a nation is, and let's make sure that we cover that here and make sure that you understand the differences between what a state and a nation is before you go on. So why don't you go ahead and just jot down a couple of quick ideas or immediate thoughts that you have before you move on. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Okay, so here is a nation. This is an example of multiple nations. Can you identify the state? Okay, if you said Great Britain, you are correct. I actually do have a really fun map that I'll show you guys that explains all of the differences between Great Britain, between Ireland, between Scotland, the British Isles. It's kind of just a fun, holy moly, wrap your brain around it kind of fun idea to look at. So, what is a nation? A nation is defined with cultural boundaries. So, these boundaries are not usually black and white. They're more fluid. They have gray areas and they are not easily defined on a map like a political border. Are they in political borders? Yes, but they may not only be within one political border. They often are going to be in multiple borders. So think back of what ethnicities are. What are things that are ethnicities that define culture? If you're thinking religion, awesome, good answer. Think of another. If you're thinking language, language is a great one that identifies people culturally. Ancestry, both mythical and actual. What do I mean by mythical? Let's see. Native Americans come to mind here, or many African tribes might see themselves as mythical, have mythical ancestry. We just said religion and language. They also might follow specific behaviors. That could be following a specific political pattern where they might believe in a democracy, or maybe they believe in a more socialism point of view. It could also be the way they might treat a specific group of people. For example, in India, they believe in a caste system there. So there are many different levels of superiority and importance awarded to individuals, and that is heavily dependent on the religion of their nation, which is primarily Hindu. Okay. Um, Generally, a nation has what they refer to as their homeland. So it's going to be the place that to them is the most important. They may not have direct access to it anymore. They may have once been forced from this location. They may practice pilgrimages to get to this homeland. This is often the hearth, and it's important to note that it doesn't always um, stay with the nation. Many times there are wars fought over land, and nations are forced to move from what was once their sacred soil. I'm sure you can probably think of a handful of people that might have had this happen to them. Obviously, the largest example that we have for this would be Native Americans in the United States, or tribes generally in North America. You know, the United States and Canada had many indigenous tribes that identified ethnically with each other because they had a common ancestry. They had a common religion, which would have been animism or spiritism, and they had their own accepted ways and behaviors that were definitely different from the others. And they did follow different political laws within their tribes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this video right here. Make sure that you've gotten these few flashcards done. If you have any questions, I will give this to you as an opportunity to turn and talk with a neighbor and go over any of the concerns that you have, or if you just want to get solid on one, or if you would like to share an example that you wrote down on your flashcard. If you guys can't come to an answer together about a question that either of you had, maybe turn and talk to a second neighbor. If they, again, still can't solidly understand or explain to you a good answer, why don't you go ahead and take this time to email it to me or send me a text via Remind.